Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Kris. This is a donated request from Mohamed. This is library chat number 15, Napoleon's 1798 invasion of Egypt and the ushering in of modernity. I think I got it right. Before we get started, I went back to 17 minutes 29 seconds at the end of the last one, and then after I paused the video, it decided to unpause for a second. So we'll go back to here. And before I get started, you can donate to the channel through the thanks button. You can subscribe to the channel through the subscribe button, or you can give a thumbs up for the video because that helps through the thumbs up. If you're one of those people who likes to hit the thumbs down, you'll probably end up getting some kind of terrible, like, finger Ebola. You just bleed through your fingers. You'll die out that way, and you don't want that to happen. So let's go back to the video.
And used for political propaganda. The symbolism of all of this is just too profound. You know, the metaphors that one can extract from this one incident are very, very deep. So think about that, right? The first printing press that was used on Arabian soil, on Arab soil in Muslim lands, was manufactured in Europe, and it was literally brought by an invading army and thrust on the people, and then used for the first thing printed was political propaganda. And we still have the initial printing of the proclamation. I think I can put on the screen over here. And the translation reads, I mean, obviously it's much longer than this, but what one paragraph reads, that it begins in the name of God, the Rahman, the Rahim. There is no God but Allah. He has no son, and he shares his power with no one. The commander-in-chief of the French armies, General Napoleon Bonaparte, says to the people of Egypt, "For too long, this bunch of slaves brought in Georgia and the Caucasus," meaning the Mamluks, "has tyrannized the most beautiful country in the world. In the eyes of God, all men are equal. So what entitles the Mamluks to all that makes life comfortable and pleasant? Who owns all of the great estates? The Mamluks. Who have the loveliest slaves? The Mamluks. Who have the most splendid horses and the finest houses? The Mamluks. If Egypt truly and rightfully belongs to them, let them produce the deeds by which God gave it to them. Once you had great cities, large canals, and prosperous trade. What has destroyed all of this, if not the greed, iniquity, and tyranny of the Mamluks?" End quote. And it goes on and on. So we find over here that Napoleon is appealing to their love of this dunya, telling them that all of the problems of the world are because of the Mamluks. And again, I'm not defending the Mamluks. I mean, definitely a lot can be said for any government and any leadership, especially the Mamluks of the time, and even the Ottomans. Again, all of this is part of history that we need to see. So Napoleon is basically using the standard age-old tactic of divide and conquer, exacerbate ethnic tensions, bring in enticement of this world, bring in racism. Those are the Mamluks, the Circassians, the Georgian slaves. Who are they to rule over you? And then, of course, Napoleon is appealing to Islamic sentiment in the name of God, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, etc., etc. And realize that the notion of European invasions was unknown up until this point in time. And of course, the Egyptians had heard of the French, but they didn't understand Napoleon's reasons for invasion. They didn't understand why this group would be coming in, and they most definitely did not understand the Enlightenment era, zeitgeist of the time, if you like, the theology and the politics of Napoleon. So Napoleon is trying his best to convey that I'm not a Catholic. I'm actually pro-Islam. I'm more closer to Islam than I am to Catholicism. And maybe in some ways, one could see where he is coming from. It's interesting that our guy, Abdurrahman al-Jabarti, the famous chronicler, he tries to explain to his Egyptian readers who these invaders are, because again, they've never seen these types of people. And so Al-Jabarti writes that they aren't quite Christian, but they're most certainly not Muslim. And he mentions that they lack all types of haya and all types of common sense. Their women don't veil. They fornicate at will, he says. He says the men defecate anywhere they want. They'll just urinate in the streets or defecate anywhere. And then he says, and when they're done, they don't even wipe themselves. This is Al-Jabarti writing about this. And then he also quotes Napoleon's proclamation, and he quotes it bit by bit, and he does a bit of a sharh of it, mocking it. It's a very ingenious way of mocking it, pointing. It's like a line by line commentary, pointing out errors, or maybe he meant this, or it's very worthy of reading if you understand the Egyptian humor, but that's in the original Arabic. And it's interesting to note, by the way, that as Al-Jabarti is describing his antagonism towards the French, and they're backward, and they smell, and they don't dress properly, and they defecate in this manner, and their women are lacking haya. When you look at the French descriptions of the Egyptians, subhanAllah, you find similar types of sentiments, right? Backwardness and hatred, and the same notions of women lacking haya. This is really interesting. Both civilizations are accusing the other of their women lacking haya. And it's just a very anthropological, point here, that a lot of times one reads in one's own weaknesses into the other. This is a well-known issue in anthropology. Anyway, back to our story. Of course, we talked about Napoleon's capture of Alexandria, but Alexandria was a small port city. You really need to capture Qahira, Egypt, Cairo. And once you've done that, then of course, the rest of the country will open up for you. And so Napoleon realized that, of course, he has to march on to Cairo. And the locals of Alexandria had already alerted the people of Cairo that Napoleon is invading. And so for the next few days or weeks, Cairo comes under a panic mode. The Mamluk base is, of course, in Cairo. That's where the majority of the army is. And so for the next, 10, 15 days, dua al-qunut was done. Salah, special prayers were done. All of the prayers had constant salawat of the Prophet ﷺ, adhan. Al-Azhar University started having qunut every single day. All of the madrasas, the children's schools and whatnot, they began having, special prayers, and the city became very much on red alert. So unlike Alexandria, Cairo was prepared, and Cairo knew there was going to be a showdown. Now the French left Alexandria. There was a small contingent left, so the bulk of the French troops, they started marching on towards Cairo. And of course, there is no way to march other than on foot, okay? Napoleon came on ships, and now from Alexandria, they have to march on foot in the month of July, okay? Think about that. And the French were wearing their ridiculous costumes head to toe. This is not the era of modern warfare where people wear camouflage and they know what to expect. This is 1798 here, and the French have their plumes and everything, top to bottom. And of course, leave it to invading armies to not really, especially the French, to not really think about the logistical details. Napoleon had forgotten to give his troops adequate water canisters as they marched in the heat of the summer of July in the deserts of Egypt, from Alexandria to Cairo. And they started marching, and they don't have adequate water canisters. What do you think is going to happen when the temperature...
I don't think it should be difficult. What's the worst that could happen? Dehydration, sunstroke, death. Yeah, it's not bad. Whatever.
Temperatures reach literally in the 120s, 130s Celsius. What is going to happen? Behold, tens and thousands of troops are marching, and water, of course, runs out.
There was a few guys who dropped to the ground and were picking up handfuls of sand, how about that, and just squeezing it and hoping to get some kind of water out of it. Other people are walking by going, yep, Jeff's trying to squeeze water out of sand again. He's apparently pretty thirsty. He's going to die soon. Let's just keep on walking.
People started going mad. Many people died. Many of them actually committed suicide. Every time they came across a village, by the time the end troops came, the water had already been finished from the entire village. Stampedes were caused at wells as they're marching through by the French soldiers, killing one another for water. And by the time they get to, by the way, of course, mirages as well. For the first time, the French soldiers see mirages everywhere, and they think they're going mad. They start running. They think they see water, and then, of course, it turns out to be a mirage. So because of that, a number of French soldiers even committed suicide. They thought they're going crazy when they see water and there's no water. Eventually, they reached the River Nile, and the entire army, it is said, just went berserk and crazy, rushed into the water like madmen. And hey, who wouldn't do that? It started drinking and gulping and whatnot. And of course, you're not supposed to drink water to your fill after you've been dehydrated for a week or two. It took them more than 2 weeks, okay, to march. More than 2 weeks from Alexandria to Cairo. Many of them died. And by the time they got there, they're just gulping up this water, which of course is going to make them sick, dysentery and whatnot. In any case, after a few days of recovery, on the 21st of July, 1798, this is the key battle, and it's called the Battle of the Pyramids, that took place because obviously the famous pyramids of Giza were in the background. The famous pyramids that we've all visited, or those that have been to Cairo visited. So the French soldiers could see the tips, not the full, because remember, the Muslim civilizations by and large had ignored the pharaonic. They thought them to be, why would anybody be interested in those, pharaonic monuments? So the three pyramids of Giza and even the Sphinx, most of them were covered up with sand. Nobody would really care about them. You could see the tips of the pyramids. And so you could see the tips of the pyramids with Napoleon on one side with his roughly 20,000 minus Allah knows how many hundreds or thousands died on the one side, and you have on the other side the Mamluk army here, okay? And
I'm sorry, did he just say the pyramids were covered up with sand? Did I hear him right? I'm going to go back. I just want to make sure I heard him right. Only the tips were exposed and the pyramids were covered with sand? No. Really? I mean,
would anybody be interested in those, pharaonic monuments? So the three pyramids of Giza and even the Sphinx, most of them were covered up with sand. Nobody would really care about them. You could see the tips of the pyramids. And so you could see the tips of the pyramids.
Wow.
With Napoleon on one side with his roughly 20,000 minus Allah knows how many hundreds or thousands died on the one side. And you have on the other side the Mamluk army here. Okay. And this is not a few thousand like Alexandria. No, you have thousands and thousands. I don't know exactly how many. We don't know exactly how many, but probably to the tune of more than 10,000 Mamluk soldiers were in Cairo at the time. Still, though, you're talking about a trained French battalion. Despite the fact that they're tired, disheveled, thirsty, many of them are sick. Still, though, they have weapons and they have rifles and they have cannons. Now, the Mamluks did have a very, very rudimentary cannon system, but nothing like the French, right? And most of the Mamluk army didn't have, as we said, weapons. They had ancient muskets going back to the 16th century or whatnot. You can't compare them to the long-distance rifles of the French. And there are vivid descriptions, multiple eyewitnesses of this particular battle, the Battle of the Pyramids, where the Mamluks charged en masse. Thousands and thousands of people were charging on their horses, and Napoleon had his troops lined up. And there's actually, modern movies that have been done by the French and others to depict this battle. You can see this online. And Napoleon used the standard tactic. Again, we've seen this in the movies all the time, but the Mamluks hadn't seen the movies. The Mamluks didn't know what to do, right? And so the Mamluks are literally charging, with takbirs and whatnot. And Napoleon tells his army, steady, 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 don't fire, don't do anything, until finally, when they're in firing and visual distance, everybody fires simultaneously. The guns go off, the rifles go off, the cannons go off. And what do you think is going to happen, right? There is simply no comparison. The Mamluks with the scimitar and horses, and Napoleon with trained battalions and with cannons. More than 6,000 Mamluk soldiers decimated. And Napoleon's losses were in the 100. At max, maybe 200 French soldiers. More than 6,000 of the Mamluks completely gone. And this basically paved the way for the French to conquer the rest of Egypt. Quite literally, in the morning of that day, the Ottoman Mamluk leader, his name was Murad Bey, the Ottoman Mamluk leader left his palace with his pageantry, with his horses, with his army and whatnot, and that same evening Napoleon slept in his bed. Quite that same day. This is like the symbolic takeover. The same evening Napoleon was in the palace of Murad Bey, surrounded by the luxury and whatnot of Murad Bey, and he had taken over literally in a few hours the battle of the pyramids. The next few months were set about consolidating his power over Egypt, and the West learned for the first time that it is super easy to invade, it is super easy to conquer, but it is impossible to actually rule. This was the historical precedent Napoleon set that nobody ever learned from up until our times, with the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan and the invasions that will follow Allah knows when. Nobody learns from history. It is super easy to bring your gun, to bring your weapons, to bring your bombs, and to conquer. But once you've conquered, you cannot rule over a population that does not want you. Nonetheless, it was at this stage, with the conquest of Cairo, that Napoleon began to court the elites and the nobles and the ulama class. And he felt that if he could get the ulama class to be his allies, that the rest of the people would follow. So he made a very special effort with the ulama class, and especially with the Azhar scholars. And he told them that he was their liberator and ally. And he told them that he was not a Christian and that he was an admirer of Islam. Now, the story of his conversion, quote unquote, right? Yes, it is mentioned in one or two early sources, but not of the first generation of actual eyewitness accounts. And technically speaking, it does appear that the conversion was a misunderstanding or an exaggeration of a later chronicler. He did in fact meet with the scholars of Al-Azhar. He did finance the Mawlid celebrations. By the way, interesting was that bid'ah, not bid'ah, I'm not even going to go there, right? Bonaparte financing the Mawlid is interesting here. The reason why he financed it was because there was no money that year because of the invasion. There was chaos, and Napoleon said, don't worry, I'll take care of the finances. So he sponsored the Mawlid. There was a massive Mawlid every single year. That year, Napoleon financed it. He gathered all of the ulama, and one of the senior scholars of Al-Azhar kept on, pressuring him to convert, and told him, if you convert, we will be behind you. If you convert, the lands of Islam can be yours. Basically, he was using the Islam card and saying, look, because they didn't like the Mamluks for many reasons. They wanted another leader. It's human nature, by the way. Politics is a dirty business. You're never going to appease the majority of people because it's just not possible to do that. But nonetheless, so a senior Sheikh of Al-Azhar was pressuring Napoleon, and in the course of that conversation, what appears to be the case is that Napoleon praised Islam immensely, and he praised the Prophet ﷺ, and he expressed his admiration of Islam. That's really what happened. Doesn't look like he actually converted. Yes, there are some books that say that, and yes, you'll find it in Muslim websites and whatnot, but I'm highly skeptical, and if you look at the original sources, they don't mention that. And in fact, we know, because we have clear statements from his own generals, from the people that are on the other side, where they're saying that Napoleon was basically using this as a ruse to court the ulama class, to praise Islam and whatnot. He was not.
So when I first heard about that battle, I was under the impression he converted, but I was under the impression he only converted to win the side of the Muslim people there, so they would help him in his fight against the Mamelukes, those Lukis, and the Ottoman, and potentially maybe the British. That was it. Whatever you're going to do, whatever it takes in war, especially if you can say, yes, I believe in what you believe, and then they'll they'll back you up to fight. Well, yeah, then that's more soldiers you have. So that's how I took it.
Not a religious person per se, and true. True, he admired certain aspects of Islam, but he never practiced Islam. He never prayed or did anything that a Muslim would do. And there's no indication from the original sources that he actually uttered the Shahada. So the notion of his conversion seems to be a misunderstanding by maybe a second generation, third generation chronicler, where the extreme praise of Islam. Yes, he did praise Islam, and he praised the Prophet ﷺ, and he praised the Quran. And in fact, the next week he wrote a letter to a sheikh that was preserved. He wrote a letter to a sheikh in another city, and he said that, I hope that I shall be able to unite all of the ulama of all of the countries and establish a uniform regime based upon the principles of the Quran, which alone are true and which alone can lead men to happiness. End quote. Now again, nobody seriously thinks that he actually believed these words, right? His own chronicler, his own generals and whatnot, they're writing very factually, like, Napoleon's making a fool out of these guys by flirting with their religion and making them feel that, the religion is the best. And in reality, he does have some praise of the Quran and whatnot. He felt it to be more sensible than the Christian Bible. That doesn't mean he was a believer. And we should not embarrass ourselves by reading in more than the facts, tell us. We have to be very careful and academic here. So to cut a long and complicated story short, the French attempted to rule over a completely alien land, foreign land to them, one whose culture they didn't understand, one whose language they had they didn't even speak fluent Arabic. It's just bizarre to imagine what's going on in 1798, just a bunch of French people invading and then thinking they can rule over all of Egypt. But they tried, and for the next 2 years they eked out an existence, and they brought about lots of reforms and lots of changes. They introduced European customs, European notions. They introduced so many, large and small things. The 150 scientists, by the way, they were given carte blanche authority to study and research, and they opened a scientific institute, or this institute for the study of science in Egypt here. And they did a lot of interesting things. Let me quote you Jabarti, our guy Al-Jabarti. Let me quote you some of Al-Jabarti's descriptions of what he himself saw. He's an eyewitness.
I'm going to pause it there. That went really fast. That was another 17 plus minutes. Okay, well, that went fast. I wanted to pause it, though, before he got into any of the quotes, because I don't want to interrupt the quotes. This blanket keeps falling. Yeah, I did. I was under the impression he did convert, but I didn't believe he did it, I'll say, seriously. He did it more for the to get the support, which I think we can all understand why. You got somebody in a foreign territory. If you don't not convert, but if you don't show respect, then you're gonna not be looked at as, is this guy the guy we want, to be here? So it's just kind of a politics and war, just kind of a game, unfortunately. Okay, so I'm gonna end this here. So I got 33 minutes left. Quick math. 25 and 8. 33. Yeah, 33 minutes. Okay. So 16-ish minutes. Whatever. Anyways, come back for part 2. No, this is part 2. Oh. It's been a busy day. Come back for part 3. How about that one? But until part 3, what do I normally say? You got it. Have a good day. Have a good night. There you go. In case you didn't know.